You know that one friend, their life looks incredible from the outside. New city, new job, weekends that feel pulled from a movie. But somehow you've never actually seen any of it. No photos, no captions, nothing. You've probably assumed they're shy or hiding something. The real reason is almost never that. And once you hear it, you'll never look at your own camera roll the same way again. Because here's what nobody tells you about people who don't post. It's rarely about hiding. Usually, it's about protecting something the rest of us gave away without ever noticing we were giving it up. Back in the 1950s, a sociologist named Irving Goffman spent years watching how people behaved and noticed something simple but strange. We all live a little like actors on a stage. There's a front stage version of you, the one you bring to work, to a first date, to the group chat, and a backstage version, the one that only exists when nobody's watching. The version that dances badly in the kitchen without needing to be witnessed by anyone at all. Social media doesn't really have a backstage. Every photo you post, however small, is a small performance. For most of us, that's fine. We drift between the two without much thought. But for some people, keeping one part of life completely off the stage isn't a quirk, it's the entire point. Take someone like Amara. She moved across the country last year, and her camera roll looks like the kind of life people design entire pages around. Sunrise hikes, a tiny apartment she painted herself, new friends who already feel like old ones. She's posted twice in 2 years, not because any of it embarrasses her, it's the opposite. The hike she remembers most clearly is the one she almost photographed and then didn't. She just sat there and watched the light change over the ridge and let it belong to her alone. For Amara, that hike didn't need an audience to count. It already happened. It was already hers. That's not the whole story, though. Plenty of private people still post sometimes. Something else is going on. In 1974, a psychologist named Mark Snyder at the University of Minnesota studied something he called self-monitoring, essentially how much a person adjusts themselves depending on who's watching. High self-monitors are constantly reading the room, checking their image the way you'd check a mirror before walking out the door. Low self-monitors act roughly the same at a job interview as they do alone in their car. Their sense of who they are doesn't shift depending on the audience. Think about the most self-assured person you know, the one who tells a story at a party and somehow makes the whole room lean in. You'd assume someone like that posts constantly. Sometimes it's the opposite. Take a guy like Dan. He's the one everyone remembers from any gathering. Easy to be around, clearly happy with his life. Search for him online, though, and you'd find almost nothing. Not because he's hiding anything, he simply never needed a timeline to confirm what he already knows about himself. For Dan, a photo was never proof of a good life. He never needed anyone else's signature on it. So some people are protecting something private, some people just don't need the mirror. But zoom out, and this was never really about a handful of unusual people. Something happened over the last 15 years that none of us voted on. The internet didn't just give us a place to share our lives, it started quietly rewriting the rules for what counts as a life worth remembering. And most of us have been playing by the new rules without ever reading them. Amara and Dan are just two of the people still living by the old ones. Here's one of the new rules nobody agreed to. Your life now needs to be witnessed by everyone who's ever known you, all at once, and somehow make sense to every one of them. A researcher named Dana Boyd first studied this as a grad student at MIT, watching people navigate the earliest social networks. She gave it a name, context collapse. In real life, you naturally shift who you are depending on the room. You don't tell your grandmother the joke you'd tell your roommate. Online, every one of those rooms collapses into one. Grandmother, boss, ex, a stranger from 10 years ago, all standing in the same room watching the same post.
Ren used to post constantly. Trips, birthdays, ordinary Tuesdays. Then one night, she shared a photo from a friend's engagement party. Nothing unusual, just her laughing with a drink in her hand. The next morning, a relative she barely spoke to had questions about it. So did a coworker. Nothing bad happened, but something shifted. She realized she'd been performing for every version of her audience at once, and no longer knew which version of herself she was supposed to be. So she stopped. Not out of embarrassment, out of exhaustion. The old definition never needed one unified audience. This one quietly does. Here's where the new definition gets literal. A life worth remembering used to mean exactly that, something you held in your own memory. Increasingly, it just means something you have footage of. A researcher named Linda Henkel at Fairfield University ran an experiment inside an art museum, having visitors on a guided tour either photograph certain objects or simply look at them, then tested what people remembered afterward. The objects people had photographed were remembered worse than the ones they simply looked at. She called it the photo-taking impairment effect, the idea that the instant you decide to capture something, part of your brain quietly hands the job of remembering over to the camera. You've probably felt a version of this. The night you didn't film ended up being the one you remember best. Priya noticed it long before she ever heard of the research. At a friend's wedding, she watched half the room lift their phones during the vows, and instead of reaching for hers, she just watched. Weeks later, she could describe the exact way the groom's voice cracked and the moment the bride started laughing instead of crying. The people who'd filmed the whole thing barely remembered it past the video itself. Priya kept the older definition, a memory that lives inside you, not just in footage. Here's the last piece, and it's not really about people who don't post at all. It's about the rest of us, quietly grading our lives against a definition we never agreed to. In 2013, a psychologist named Ethan Cross at the University of Michigan texted people 5 times a day for 2 weeks, asking how they felt right now and how much Facebook they'd used since the last check-in. A quiet pattern showed up. The more someone used it between 2 check-ins, the worse they tended to feel by the next one, and the worse they felt, the more they used it again after that. Not a dramatic collapse, just a slow loop, tightening a little each time, so gradual that most people never noticed they were inside it. Some of the people who've quietly stepped back from posting never read that study. They just noticed the loop the way you'd notice a food that doesn't sit right with you. Not punishing themselves, not performing privacy either. They simply stopped grading their lives against it and went back to the quieter, older one. So maybe the real question was never why some people don't post. The internet didn't just give us a place to share our lives, it quietly changed our definition of what it means to have a life worth remembering, a life you used to just have to live. Now, on some level, it has to be seen. Amara, Dan, Ren, and Priya never agreed to that trade. They just quietly kept the older definition. Not every hike needs a caption. Not every night needs proof. The version of you that only exists when your phone stays in your pocket isn't the version you're hiding. It's the one still living by the original rules. And if you've made it this far without posting a single photo today, some part of you already knows exactly what those rules used to be. If you just realized which definition you've been living by, tell me in the comments. And if you want more of this kind of quiet psychology, subscribe. There's more waiting for you here.